Let me show you something magic. It's magnetic watercolour paint. So the movement you can see there is actually the pigment particles being pulled around by the magnet that I've got underneath this plate. We all know that watercolour is the most magical medium. You just add a little water, add a little paint, and it will explode on the surface and move around like it's got a life of its own. But what you might not know is that some watercolour paints are also magnetic. I kind of knew that ages ago, and then I saw a film on YouTube by Daniel Smith, and I'll put a link to that below. I got thinking, well, iron is magnetic and some pigments contain iron, particularly Mars black, which is iron oxide, so surely that would be magnetic. Well, I have a curious mind, so I thought I would compare and contrast them, see how they perform and whether they pass the magnet test. My name's Liz Chadderton. I'm a professional artist based in Berkshire, and every week I bring you a tip or trick that I wish I'd known about ages ago. And this week it's about magnetic watercolour paints. The two paints we're going to look at is this Daniel Smith Hematite Genuine and this Turner Mars Black. Mars Black is made from iron oxide, PBK 11 is the pigment, whereas this Hematite Genuine is made from bloodstone hematite ground up and suspended in gum arabic in the normal way. It's worth just squeezing them out onto this white plate, so that we can just have an initial impression before we try and get a little bit more scientific about it. This is definitely a warmer black to start with, and then this is a cooler bluer black. When I put the magnet under the hematite on the right, you can see that movement, and hopefully indeed we can see that movement on the left now. So they are both magnetic paint. This is my little test sheet. I'm going to swatch out both colours just to see how they thin down and to see what their transparency is like. Then we'll have a go at granulation. I'm going to mix them with a bit of a staining, a really good transparent staining colour, to see if I can get a sort of super granulation. I've done a whole film about this, so I'll put a link in the comment section. See how they react wet in wet, and then we'll have a test of their magnetic properties. I've got some Mars Black there, and let's swatch it out and see what it's actually like on paper as opposed to the ceramic dish. Comes down to a beautiful soft grey, and you can see it granulating already. On the next swatch I did just want to see what granulation I get, but you can see just from swatching it out there that it really is granulating very, very quickly. Now, to get good granulation, you need plenty of water because that helps the pigment swim around, and then you just need to leave it alone and let it do its own thing and not fiddle with it. Palette, I've got some blue, that's phthalo blue, that I'm going to mix with a good swatch of the black to make really the equivalent of lunar blue from Daniel Smith, because if you look, that's what it is. So let's swatch that out here and see what sort of mix we get. Nice colour blue. Let's see what sort of granulation we get. I want to see all the pigment disperses in water. Then I am going to drop in, I may have contaminated this a bit, just drop in my Mars Black. I have, unfortunately, I think I've got a little bit of that blue in there, so you can see how the blue is spreading out, though that is rather nice. Moves nicely through the water, we get beautiful soft edges. That's really pretty. Try the magnet test. Again, my hunch is that it'll need water to move around on the surface. Pretty generous with this wash. The granulation is far nicer on there already than over there, and if I recall, I was very foolish and went back over it so I think I may have upset some of the granulation there. I've got my magnet and I'm putting under the paper. And once again, actually, I should just prove, look, you can't see it through the paper. You might see a little bit of a shadow. But when you put it under the wet wash, indeed, you can see the pigment moving. Now, the big question is, how much can we concentrate the pigment in areas, and can we line it up with the magnetic field by moving the magnet? I think the slower you move the magnet, the more chance you give the pigment of lining up, and that's just fascinating. Now, whether you can do it accurately enough to control this technique, I'd certainly have to play with it a lot more in the context of a painting. But I hope you can see down here really fine clumping and lining up of those pigment particles. Secret is, when you've got a nice pattern that you're happy with, stop. It's the turn of the Hematite Genuine, and again I've squeezed out some into my palette, which I'll just pop there, and let's swatch it out to start with. Looking at it, I would say it's actually a warm, as we suspected, it's a warm black. And as you thin it out, you can see a slight browny tinge coming to it. Let's test out the granulation on here, and I will learn from my mistakes. And I did know this, of just putting it down and leaving it in place to let the granulation happen. Again, I'm going to mix in some phthalo blue with that hematite and see what happens, whether we get a nice sort of super granulation effect. I'm doing wet in wet, so I'm going to wet the circle and see how it spreads. And I've tried not to contaminate this one as well. Oh, that's beautiful. So look at that go. This is really quite wet, this paper, probably a bit wetter than the other one. So I might have to just let it dry a little and go back in. So in very wet paper, again, you can just see a slight sort of buff colour coming out of it. We'll compare in a moment, but my gut reaction is that that's not feathering out in the same way at all as Mars Black. Let's have a little go at its magnetic properties and see what happens. Lift that up and we'll get that magnet underneath. And we've got some beautiful lining up of the pigment over there and some finer lining up here. So I may take my own advice, and when we've got a pattern we like, I'm going to stop. We'll let this dry along with the Mars Black, and then we'll do a quick comparison to see what we think. And actually, just before we look on the paper, I had just put this to one side and then look back at it, and it's just gorgeous. And it's interesting, you can see the brown tinge of the bloodstone, the hematite coming out, and these amazing patterns. Let me pull that up, that it's just formed on the ceramic plate. And that makes me wonder how brilliant this would be on Yupo paper. And sadly, I haven't got any Yupo in my stash, otherwise I would try it out for you. So time for compare and contrast. They're obviously both black. They are both excellent light fastness. And if we look at this swatch test on the left, you can definitely see the tones are different. So the Mars Black is definitely a cooler black than the hematite. In terms of granulation, you'll have to forgive me because I fiddled with that by mistake, because you do it automatically, and I've ruined the granulation on there. But if we look with the phthalo blue, you can see we've got some beautiful granulation. Looking at the wet in wet, lovely soft edges, and we'll come to the magnetic in the moment. On the other hand, with the hematite, again, stunning granulation, and again beautiful with the phthalo blue. But the wet in wet was a little bit disappointing, to be honest. My perception is that the granulation is far finer on the hematite than it is on the Mars Black. So if you want dramatic, really quite clumpy granulation, seems to me that Mars Black is really doing it. And if you want a finer, more nuanced granulation, the hematite seems to be the way to go. Looking at the wet in wet here, I know I'd got some contamination going on, hence the blue, but far softer feathering and pretty edges with the Mars Black. So with regards to the magnetic movement, from this test, I would say that the hematite won hands down. We've certainly got very pretty patterns and it's separated out with the Mars Black, but it seemed to form longer strings of pigment with the hematite. Put those side by side so hopefully you can see those a little more clearly. But something you might be interested in is the price. And the hematite is a series 3, which in the UK at the moment is £15.40. That's what I paid for it. That's about $19. The Mars Black is series 1 and currently costs £5.60. They're both 15mm tubes, so the same, and that is about $6.90. So the Mars Black is a third of the hematite. Hi, this is Future Liz, and as I edited the film I realised I hadn't told you about their transparency or their lifting capability, and actually they're very similar, so it wasn't too bad that I missed that out. They're both semi-transparent, looking at how they cover that black line, and when I used a damp brush they both lift pretty well but just leave a little bit of staining. So which one's right for you is of course entirely up to you. If you're looking for a warm black but you're on a budget, you might do pretty well just putting a smidge of a warm brown, a burnt umber or something like that, just a smidge into the Mars Black. If you're looking for dramatic magnetic properties and trying to really exploit that in your work, then I think the hematite is the way to go. But if you're looking for those beautiful feathery edges, back to the Mars Black again. I carry on experimenting and actually try this in a painting context, and I wonder if I get more experience using the magnet and working out the exact wetness of the wash for it to work perfectly, whether I might be able to up the game of the Mars Black. If I can, I'll let you know.